Deptford, New Jersey, a town where life is slow, simple, and safe, at least on the surface. Just under an hour from Philadelphia, Deptford is the kind of place where neighbors nod across driveways and local diners know your usual. But in early 2025, something disrupted that peace. Something so chilling it seemed like fiction. A young woman, 26-year-old Jacqueline Diorio, was arrested and charged with attempting to hire a hitman. Not just to take out a romantic rival, not even a stranger. The target of her plan, her former boyfriend, and his 19-year-old daughter. This story isn't just about crime, it's about love gone wrong, a crumbling mind, and a decision that turned dark thoughts into deadly plans. It's about how quickly someone's life can spiral when emotion replaces reason, and when heartbreak breeds vengeance. So, who is Jacqueline Diorio? On paper, she was a regular 26-year-old woman. She worked an ordinary job, had a social circle, and lived a life not unlike many others her age. Friends described her as emotional at times, but not dangerous. Certainly not the type to make national headlines. She once had a romantic relationship with a man who would later become a Philadelphia police officer. We don't know the intimate details of their relationship, but what we do know is that it ended, and not amicably. That breakup would become the trigger for something truly unthinkable. According to law enforcement, after their breakup, Jacqueline's thoughts didn't just dwell on heartbreak, they turned to revenge. Investigators say she believed the man she once loved had wronged her, that his daughter was somehow part of the problem, and that the only solution was to eliminate them both. Her plan? Find someone who could make the problem go away. Authorities say she sought out a man she believed was capable of murder. She allegedly offered him $12,000 to kill 2 people. That's $6,000 per life, paid in cold cash. But what Jacqueline didn't know was that the man she contacted wasn't a real killer. He was working with law enforcement. From the moment she made contact, everything was recorded. Police say she met with this individual, now acting as an informant, and handed him a $500 down payment. Just the beginning of what she believed would be a murder contract. She allegedly gave specific details, names, addresses, schedules. The kind of chilling specifics that prosecutors say left no doubt about her intentions. On February 20th, 2025, Jacqueline Diorio was arrested. Charged with attempted murder and conspiracy, she was taken into custody and denied bail. Her mugshot flooded social media. The headlines wrote themselves, "Woman tries to hire hitman to kill police officer and daughter." To the public it was shocking. To the police it was a textbook takedown of a murder plot, but questions started pouring in. What pushed her to this point? Was it pure anger, mental illness, a moment of instability, or something colder and more calculated? Deptford residents were stunned. One neighbor told reporters she was always polite, kind even. No one saw this coming. Another said, "It's terrifying to think someone so normal could plan something so violent." On social media, reactions were swift. Some blamed mental health issues, others argued that more needed to be known before passing judgment, and some, bluntly, just wanted justice. But this case isn't over. Far from it. Prosecutors say they have recordings, detailed evidence of Jacqueline describing exactly what she wanted done, conversations that will be played in court, and a paper trail leading straight back to her. As the investigation unfolds, a deeper story emerges, one not just about a crime but about manipulation, mental health, and how rage can turn deadly. In the next part of this series, we'll dive into the undercover sting, how investigators built their case, what Jacqueline said when she believed she was alone, and how a moment of cold calculation may have sealed out a hit. She thought she was being discreet, careful. She believed no one would know, that the plan would stay between them. But she was wrong. From the moment she made contact, the man she trusted, the one she believed would take 2 lives, was already cooperating with law enforcement, and everything that happened next was part of an undercover sting. The first time Jacqueline brought up the idea, it wasn't vague or hypothetical. Prosecutors say she was direct, clear. She allegedly told the informant she wanted her ex-boyfriend and his 19-year-old daughter gone, that she couldn't live with them walking around free. Authorities say she described her former boyfriend as abusive, emotionally, possibly physically, though those claims remain unverified. Whether real or not, Jacqueline allegedly saw his continued existence as a threat or a torment. As their conversations progressed, the so-called hitman kept law enforcement in the loop. He wore a wire. Every meeting was monitored, every phone call recorded. In one meeting, Jacqueline is reported to have said, "He deserves it, they both do, I want it done clean, quick." According to the Gloucester County Prosecutor's Office, this wasn't a one-time outburst. This was a plan, built over days. To seal the deal, Jacqueline handed over $500 in cash, a down payment, investigators say, to start the job. She promised more once it was done. The full amount, $12,000. She even allegedly discussed timing. When to do it, how, whether to stage it as an accident. She wanted the daughter taken first. That, to her, would hurt her ex the most. She wanted him to suffer. The coldness of the plan chilled even experienced officers. Law enforcement had heard enough. With the down payment made and her intent captured on tape, they made their move. On February 20th, 2025, officers executed the arrest. Jacqueline was taken into custody without incident. The community was shocked, but the police were confident they had their case. This was a deliberate, planned attempt to end 2 lives. Thanks to quick action and cooperation, no lives were lost. She was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder, both serious felonies that could carry decades in prison if convicted. In court, Jacqueline appeared visibly shaken but composed. She pleaded not guilty. Her attorney asked for bail. The judge denied it. The prosecutor argued she was a danger to the community and to the targets of her plan. The victims, fortunately unharmed, were placed under protection during the proceedings. The public, meanwhile, had questions. Was she mentally ill, acting out of rage, or simply someone consumed by obsession? People who knew Jacqueline say she had struggled emotionally in the past. She'd had turbulent relationships. She could be impulsive, reactive. But murder? Some believe she broke, that she spiraled mentally after the breakup. Others think this wasn't about mental illness, but control. In a social media post months earlier, she had hinted at feeling abandoned. One cryptic message read, "Some people deserve karma. I just wish I could deliver it myself." Was this post a red flag, or just venting? The evidence against her is mounting recorded conversations, text messages, a cash payment, and a cooperating witness. The prosecution believes it's a solid case. But Jacqueline's defense team is already pushing back. They've hinted that she may have been manipulated, that she never truly intended to go through with it, that it was fantasy, not fact. This raises a critical legal question. Can intent alone prove guilt if the crime was never carried out? In Part 3, we'll examine the courtroom drama, the defense strategy, and whether Jacqueline's past, her mental health, her relationships, her trauma, could be the key to her future. Was this a cold-blooded plan, or a cry for help taken too far?
When Jacqueline Diorio stood before the judge for the first time, the courtroom was packed. The world was watching. The case against her was cut and dry. 2 people, targeted for murder, a down payment made, and a chilling plan recorded. But Jacqueline's defense team wasn't giving up easily. As the trial began, the question that loomed over everything was simple. Was Jacqueline a cold-hearted criminal, or was she a woman who'd been pushed to the edge, someone who could not be held fully accountable for her actions? The prosecution had their case locked in. Jacqueline was caught in the act, offering money, giving details and describing her plan to kill. But the defense, led by a seasoned attorney, wasn't about to let her off the hook. Instead, they painted a different picture. Jacqueline, they argued, wasn't a calculating killer. She was a woman trapped in emotional turmoil, a woman whose mind had been broken by years of heartbreak and trauma, a woman who had snapped. And most importantly, they claimed she didn't have the mental clarity to understand the full consequences of what she was doing. Her defense attorney made an argument many didn't expect. Jacqueline wasn't in her right mind when she planned the murders. They pointed to her emotional instability, which they claimed was brought on by a series of devastating breakups, a history of unhealthy relationships, and, according to them, her failure to cope with personal loss. The defense team introduced evidence of Jacqueline's past struggles with anxiety, depression, and mental health issues. They argued that while her actions were indeed criminal, they should be viewed through the lens of someone who had lost control, someone pushed to the brink by her emotions and circumstances. She was not thinking rationally. She was acting out of anger and despair. This wasn't a well-thought-out plan. This was an emotional outburst that went too far. The prosecution, however, wasn't convinced. They argued that Jacqueline's actions were far too calculated, a down payment for murder, specific details provided about the victims, a clear plan of execution. This wasn't an emotional outburst, they claimed. This was a carefully planned crime. To bolster their case, they presented the undercover recordings, the chilling conversations where Jacqueline discussed the murder in cold detail. These tapes painted a picture of a woman who was not out of control, but in full command of what she wanted. The question of mental health became central to the case. Was Jacqueline's state of mind a mitigating factor? Could her emotional and psychological struggles reduce her level of culpability? Psychiatrists called by both sides offered conflicting opinions. The prosecution called a psychiatrist who claimed Jacqueline was fully aware of her actions and understood the consequences. He argued that while she may have experienced emotional distress, there was no sign of any significant mental illness that could have impaired her judgment. On the other side, the defense brought in an expert who believed Jacqueline's actions were the result of severe emotional trauma. This expert suggested that Jacqueline's history of depression and anxiety made her more prone to impulsive decisions, and that her inability to properly process emotions led her to act out in destructive ways. As the trial went on, Jacqueline's family and friends took the stand. Many testified to her emotional instability in the wake of her breakup with her ex-boyfriend. They painted a picture of a woman who had trouble letting go of relationships, someone who often struggled to manage her anger and sadness. She would talk about how things were never fair in her life. She'd get upset, talk about getting revenge, but I never thought it would go this far. It was just talk. It never seemed serious. She was always a little dramatic, but it didn't fit her. She was never violent. The emotional testimony painted Jacqueline as a woman struggling with heartbreak. But did it show her as a person so mentally fragile that she could not be held accountable for what she planned? Outside the courtroom, opinions were divided. Some believed that Jacqueline's emotional struggles could provide a reason, if not an excuse, for her actions. Others felt she should be held fully accountable for what she did. After all, she had planned the murders, made the payment, and had specific targets in mind. Public support for Jacqueline seemed to wane as the trial progressed. Many people couldn't reconcile the idea of a woman who seemed so normal on the outside, someone who had spent time laughing with friends, working a regular job, and enjoying simple pleasures with the person who plotted to take 2 lives. Finally, the time came for the jury to deliberate. They would have to decide if Jacqueline was guilty of attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. In those quiet moments before the verdict, the jury was faced with one of the toughest decisions of their lives. Was Jacqueline a broken woman acting out of emotional pain, or was she a cold-blooded individual who simply got caught before completing her crime? As the hours ticked by, all eyes were on the courthouse. The tension was unbearable. And when the jury finally returned, the world would know the fate of Jacqueline.
The jury has deliberated. After days of courtroom drama, emotional testimony, and a battle between 2 opposing views of Jacqueline Diorio, the moment of truth had arrived. The fate of a woman who once lived a quiet life, now accused of plotting 2 murders, hung in the balance. As the jury filed back into the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Everyone waited for the final decision. Would Jacqueline walk away with a chance to rebuild her life, or would she face decades behind bars for her actions? The judge called the courtroom to order. The jury foreman stood up, holding the verdict in his hand. Everyone held their breath. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jacqueline Diorio, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Jacqueline's face remained stoic, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of emotion. She had been found guilty of attempting to take 2 lives, a crime that, for many, was impossible to fully comprehend. As the verdict was read aloud, Jacqueline's family sat in stunned silence. Her mother, tears welling up, clasped her hands tightly. Her friends, who had testified to her emotional struggles, now sat, their faces pale. They had hoped for a different outcome, one that might show compassion for a troubled woman. But the jury had seen something different. On the other side, the victims, Jacqueline's ex-boyfriend and his daughter, breathed a sigh of relief. They had been through hell, knowing their lives had been in danger. The tension and fear of an uncertain future had gripped them during the trial. But now, they had answers. The sentencing came a few weeks later. Jacqueline Diorio stood before the judge again, this time facing the consequences of her actions. The courtroom was silent, save for the sound of the gavel and the judge's voice. Jacqueline Diorio, you are sentenced to 20 years in prison for the crime of attempted murder and conspiracy. The court recognizes the emotional and psychological distress that contributed to your actions, but your intent was clear. The lives of 2 people were endangered, and for that, you will pay the price. The sentence was harsh, but not unexpected. The judge acknowledged Jacqueline's mental health struggles, yet emphasized that the seriousness of her actions could not be ignored. This was a case that demanded justice for the victims, but also offered Jacqueline the possibility of rehabilitation. The debate surrounding Jacqueline's mental health continued even after the verdict. Many believed that her emotional instability played a significant role in her actions. Could she have been a victim of her own psychological distress? Was she simply a product of a toxic relationship and an unstable emotional state? Experts were divided. Some said she needed intense psychological treatment and rehabilitation, not prison time. Others believed that the severity of her plan indicated a level of premeditation that should not be excused. Her case sparked conversations across the country about mental health and the justice system. Could the criminal justice system be more compassionate toward individuals who, while guilty of serious crimes, may be suffering from untreated mental illnesses? Or was it right for Jacqueline to face the full force of the law, given the gravity of what she'd done? For Jacqueline Diorio, the future now seemed uncertain. Once an ordinary woman living in a suburban neighborhood, she now faced decades in prison, her life irrevocably changed by the decisions she made. Though her defense team had tried to paint her as a woman pushed to the edge by mental health struggles, the reality was far more complex. Jacqueline's actions had destroyed relationships, caused immeasurable pain, and jeopardized two innocent lives. Now, as she began serving her sentence, Jacqueline would have time to reflect on what led her to this moment. Was it truly her mental health that caused her to act so violently? Or was it something deeper, a desire for control, revenge, or even a combination of both? Jacqueline's case may be over in the courts, but its implications are far from finished. As she serves her sentence, her case serves as a reminder of the complexities of justice, revenge, and the human mind. What happens next in her story? Will she find the help she needs to rebuild her life, or will she continue down a path of bitterness and anger? The question remains unanswered, as her future hangs in the balance. The victims, meanwhile, have begun to rebuild their lives. They continue to heal, both physically and emotionally, from the trauma Jacqueline's plot almost brought them. Jacqueline's story is just one example of how a person's life can spiral out of control, and how the line between justice and mercy can blur in complex cases like hers. For now, the law has spoken. But the larger conversation about mental health, emotional trauma, and criminal responsibility continues. While Jacqueline Diorio's case may have closed, its echoes are still being felt. People are asking questions about how society handles those who commit heinous acts while dealing with profound emotional pain. Can we separate the person from the crime? And if so, what kind of justice is truly fair? As Jacqueline Diorio's story fades from the headlines, it remains a cautionary tale of the darkness that can lie beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives. A reminder that beneath every crime is a story, and beneath every story is a person, one who may have been lost long before their actions made them notorious.
Jacqueline Diorio's case was not just a criminal one, it was a story about a woman who had reached her breaking point. A woman whose mental health struggles may have driven her to the brink of unimaginable actions. As she faces the consequences of her crime, her story forces us to take a hard look at a much larger issue, the mental health crisis in America and its intersection with the criminal justice system. But what happens when mental illness meets criminal intent? How should the law respond when someone's emotional struggles blur the line between victim and perpetrator? In this part, we will delve deeper into Jacqueline's psychological history and the broader conversation about mental health and crime. Jacqueline's defense attorneys claimed that emotional distress played a significant role in her actions. They painted a portrait of a woman who had suffered a series of turbulent relationships and ongoing struggles with mental health issues. Her ex-boyfriend, who became the target of a murder plot, wasn't just a romantic partner. He was, according to Jacqueline, the source of her deepest pain. In interviews and in court, Jacqueline described feeling abandoned and emotionally abused. She spoke of a relationship that had left her emotionally scarred, one that had taken a toll on her self-worth and stability. She had endured years of emotional volatility, and when the relationship ended, she found herself struggling to cope with the loss. But what happens when the pain from a breakup or emotional turmoil becomes something more dangerous? What happens when feelings of abandonment turn into something toxic, a desire for revenge? Mental health experts on both sides of Jacqueline's case were quick to weigh in. The prosecution argued that while Jacqueline may have suffered from emotional pain, she was fully aware of her actions. They claimed that her behavior wasn't the result of a psychotic break or severe mental illness, but rather a calculated decision born of vengeance and frustration. On the other hand, the defense pointed to Jacqueline's history of anxiety, depression, and borderline personality traits as mitigating factors. They argued that Jacqueline's actions were impulsive, fueled by emotional instability. In their view, her mental health struggles had clouded her judgment, pushing her toward a decision that she might not have made under different circumstances. There is a very real connection between untreated emotional trauma and violent actions. When someone is experiencing intense emotional pain, especially if they've been exposed to abuse or betrayal, they can act impulsively without fully understanding the consequences. The experts raised an important point. Could Jacqueline have been the victim of her own unaddressed mental health needs? And if so, does that mean she should be treated differently under the law? The case exposed the fragile line between those who commit crimes out of malice and those who are struggling with conditions that affect their behavior. In Jacqueline's case, she wasn't just a criminal. She was someone who had been failed by a system that should have helped her long before she reached this breaking point. For many people struggling with emotional distress, therapy and early intervention can make all the difference. Jacqueline's story is a stark reminder of what can happen when someone with emotional and mental health needs does not receive the care and support they require. In Jacqueline's case, it's unclear whether she ever sought therapy or counseling for her struggles. Some close to her suggest that she may have been reluctant to seek help, either due to stigma or a belief that she could handle it on her own. This reluctance to address mental health issues head-on is common for many people, especially those who feel isolated or misunderstood. But the question remains, could therapy have prevented the tragedy? Could an intervention early on have stopped Jacqueline from going down the dangerous path she ultimately chose? Jacqueline's case is not an isolated one. In the United States, the intersection of mental health and the criminal justice system is a growing concern. Every year, thousands of individuals are arrested for crimes related to mental health issues, crimes they might not have committed if they had access to proper care. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, nearly 1 in 5 adults in the United States experience mental illness each year. Of these individuals, many end up in the criminal justice system due to untreated conditions like depression, anxiety, and personality disorders. This statistic raises critical questions about the effectiveness of the criminal justice system in dealing with mental health issues. Prisons have become de facto mental health institutions. Many individuals who are incarcerated have histories of untreated mental illness, yet instead of receiving the psychological care they need, they are often subjected to punitive measures that do little to address their underlying conditions. For Jacqueline, the path to her conviction could have been different had she been provided with more resources, support, and mental health care early on. If she had received therapy or counseling, perhaps her emotional turmoil would have been addressed before it reached the breaking point that led her to plot 2 murders. Jacqueline's case has highlighted the need for reform within both the mental health care and criminal justice systems. Advocates argue that there should be more focus on mental health awareness, access to resources, and treatment options for those at risk of criminal behavior due to emotional distress or psychological disorders. Across the nation, there is a growing movement to shift the focus from punishment to rehabilitation, especially for those who are mentally ill. Many believe that a person who commits a crime while suffering from untreated mental health issues should not automatically face the harshest penalties, but should instead be given the opportunity for treatment and rehabilitation. For Jacqueline, her future now lies within the prison system. But perhaps the most important part of her journey is not her sentence, but the chance for her to address the mental health issues that contributed to her crime. Will she seek help? Will she be given the resources she needs to heal and rebuild her life? Or will she be forgotten, locked away, and left to struggle without the support she desperately needs? Only time will tell if Jacqueline can turn her life around. but her case will continue to raise questions about how we treat those who are mentally ill in society, and whether the criminal justice system is equipped to handle the growing intersection of mental health and crime. Jacqueline Diorio's story is far from over. It's a story of pain, mistakes, and redemption. A story that continues to challenge how we view mental health, crime, and justice. As we reflect on her case, let us remember that behind every criminal act is a person, and behind every person is a story. Jacqueline's story serves as a reminder that no one is beyond redemption and no one is immune from the emotional struggles that can lead us down the wrong path. In the end, it's not just about the crime, but about the potential for healing for both the victim and the